Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Levine. I just wanted to check in on one thing. So I've been reading over your answers to some of the text analysis, and it's great. I'm glad that so many of you have dug in and done some work to try to think through these things. But there's one of them that I want to make sure that I give you a little bit of guidance on, because I think in a lot of ways, understanding what's going on with this piece is key to understanding a lot of what's going on with CLR James's book. So I promise this will not be a very long video, and I will not subject you to videos that often while we're out of school, but I thought it might be easiest to go over this way. And of course, you are welcome to send me email or whatever if you have questions. So let's talk about this thing about the venal race of scholars on page 51. And let me get you my screen here so we can go together. All right, so over here on page 51, this is the Open University of the Left PDF version that hopefully all of you have access to. I, of course, have my own beat-up copy here as well. So let's talk about the beginning of this paragraph here. A venal race of scholars, profiteering panders to national vanity, have conspired to obscure the truth about abolition. So most of you who have responded have gotten the literal meaning of this sentence basically right. You've gone and translated stuff, and that's great. So literally is saying, you know, an evil or corrupt group of experts, in order to make money, have been trying to conceal the truth about what happened with abolition. But what I want to talk about really quickly is a little bit more deeply what he means by this, right? Why he is talking about this. So this is not CLR James introducing a section about some particular piece of history as much as he's introducing a section about the way he thinks history should be done. So the venal race of scholars, these are the history teachers. These are all the other historians who have written books about why slavery ended. And he thinks that the reason they have written the way they have, the reason they've taught the way they have about slavery, is that they are pandering to national vanity and also making money, profiteering, right? They are telling people a story about the way slavery ended that makes us feel relatively good about ourselves, right? So basically, the story that he thinks most historians are telling is the Enlightenment story. Slavery ended because people are basically good, and people realized that slavery was bad, that it was unfair to enslave people, right? And so we eventually got rid of it. There were some wars. It wasn't easy, but we eventually sort of came to our senses. What James is saying is that that's not the actual answer, right? The actual explanation is economic. So you'll notice that a little bit down, I'm hoping that with the screen share you can see my cursor. Pardon me. You've got this bit about well-meaning persons who've talked of the iniquity of slavery and the slave trade, yada, yada. In every time period, what he's saying is there are people who are morally good, but they're individuals. And for a Marxist like James, individuals are not the main thing that moves history. Systems move history, particularly economic systems. So the real question is not, were there some good people who realized that this horrible institution was horrible? The real question is, well, what happens at the end of the 18th century into the 19th century that makes those people suddenly powerful in a way that they were not? And that's where he tells this whole economic story, right? Where the rise of abolitionism in Britain has to do with the fact that Britain was no longer profiting from slave-based agriculture because they lost most of their American colonies that were doing things like growing cotton. They still controlled India, but slavery wasn't as economically viable in India for a variety of reasons. And so basically the British realized, and this is that second quote, they're slitting their own throat by continuing to sell slaves, because they're mostly selling slaves to the French, who are using those slaves to grow sugar, right? And basically beat Britain economically. So the slave trade, the existence of the slave trade becomes economically less viable for Britain. And James is basically going to say, this is the whole deal with why slavery goes away at this time period. There are technological and social changes that are happening that make slavery no longer the best economic system for the people in charge. And that's what suddenly makes them care about what folks like Clarkson, who have always been saying slavery is evil, are saying, instead of going, yes, yes, it's evil, but what can you do? Which is what they had done to a large extent beforehand. So two things are worth keeping in mind about this, right? At least two. There might be three, depending on how you count. All right, so first thing, part of what James is doing in this whole book is having an argument with Enlightenment style historians. So a lot of what he talks about is going to make the most sense if you understand that part of who he is trying to argue against are people who think either that history changes because great people, powerful individuals arise who have new ideas, or history changes because people have good ideas and those good ideas drive out the bad ideas, right? So he wants you to understand that that's not what history does. History changes, he thinks, because of economic change. So that's one thing. And there's a second place where we see this come up. We're probably going to get to this maybe next week or week after. Let's see if I can grab this. This is in Paris Mass is Complete on page 128. So he's talking about the French Revolution here, right? So on page bottom of page 127, he says, those in power never give way, talking about the king in France primarily, and admit defeat only to plot and scheme to regain their lost power and privilege. Had the monarchists been white, the bourgeoisie brown, so of mixed race is what he means here, and the masses of France black, the French Revolution would have gone down in history as a race war. But although they were all white in France, they fought just the same. The struggle of classes ends either in the reconstruction of society or in the common ruin of the contending classes. And in the case of France, James thinks that it was the first one. The French Revolution laid the basis of modern France, the country as a whole being strong enough to stand the shock and profit by it, but so corrupt and rotten was the slave society of San Domingo that it could not stand any strain and perished as it deserved to perish. So what's going on here is another version of this kind of analysis. What's going on is not an argument of ideas in the French Revolution or the San Domingo Revolution, according to James. It's an argument of economics. Part of that, and the reason I pull this thing from page 128, is that it's going to shape his understanding of race. CLR James definitely thinks that race and racism are a thing. But an important thing that shapes his analysis, especially what happens to the people of mixed race in San Domingue, is his idea that racism, well, so basically to say race is not, he thinks, a real thing, right? It's kind of a made-up category. It's made up to serve racism. And racism is essentially a tool of class struggle. It's a tool of class war. You use racist ideas when you are in power and you are trying to keep people who are out of power from organizing and threatening you, is essentially his understanding of how race and class and economic power are intertwined. And that's something that it's worth keeping in the back of your head, because it'll make sense of a lot of the way that James talks about this throughout the rest of the book. All right, last thing to leave you with that fits into this framework to help you understand what's going on. Many Marxists, if you encounter them at all elsewhere, are worried, and someone like Perry, who we read, they're mostly focused on what traditional Orthodox Marxists take to be the big class conflict of the 20th century, the 21st century, between the bourgeoisie, the merchant class, the people who own factories, who own land, and that sort of thing, and the proletariat, the people who work for money, the workers, right? So the owners versus the workers. At the time of the French Revolution and the Saint-Domingue Revolution and the American Revolution, though, this age of revolutions, that was not the big fight yet. What was happening there was that there was an older class, the aristocracy, that was essentially dying. So the aristocracy were people who, like kings and knights, right? These are folks, they're not like the bourgeoisie. They don't control industrial means of production. They control traditional rights and privileges and traditional means of production, particularly land, right? So the aristocracy come from a system, the feudal system, where you don't buy land. Land is passed down through families from divine right of kings. Your family's been anointed, and that's why you have this land. The bourgeoisie, the owners, the merchant class, hated this, right? They want to be able to buy land. They want to be able to have money and have all the privileges that come with that, not be told, well, yes, you have money, but you're still basically a peasant because, your father's 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 father didn't fight with Charlemagne, right? So the class struggle that's going on, especially in the American Revolution, according to most Marxist analysts, is really between the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie, right? That's the fight that's driving that piece of history. And once that fight is done, then the struggles between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. One of the things that's interesting to James, to me, frankly, about the Haitian Revolution is that you've got two different class wars kind of happening at the same time. The bourgeoisie, represented largely by the big whites, are fighting the aristocrats. They don't want the exclusive. They don't want the king, right? Or they want the king tamed, even if the king's going to exist. And also, you've got, because of the factory-like plantation system, you've got this rising modern-style proletariat of organized and jammed together workers in the massive slaves who are fighting against the bourgeoisie at the same time, right? They're fighting for liberation. They're fighting for a change to an economic order where they're packed together in these factory-like systems. So you have this clash that looks like the main clash of the 20th and 21st centuries between the people who own factories and the people who work in factories, basically. At the same time as you have this clash between the traditional prerogatives of the aristocracy, the kings, and their servants, versus the bourgeoisie who want to break out of that and have a system based on money instead of based on privilege. All right, hopefully some of that's at least helpful, and we will have plenty of time as we all sit at home to try to work through this stuff. There are places where this analysis has been applied to race and slavery issues outside of Saint-Domingue. I'm going to try to dig up, just as an optional reading, a thing that Karl Marx wrote about the US Civil War, giving a similar kind of analysis. Yeah, feel free to email me, feel free to stop by online office hours, and I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy out there.